And so without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Gabrielle Rowles, who's a senior trainer at Boing Boing, and she'll tell you a little bit more about that. She's going to be discussing how the school environment and culture is central to staff wellbeing, and she'll also be sharing some practical tips to help us cope during these challenging times. So over to you, Gabrielle.
Thanks very much. Hello everybody, Bore da, and welcome to this session on staff wellbeing. I'm now going to try and share my screen, and Jen will be able to tell me whether it's worked. So is that working?
Yes.
Great. So, there should be a picture of me with my first ever class there. So just quickly to introduce myself. So yeah, my name's Gabrielle Rowles, pronounced like ham rolls and loo rolls and so on. And I've been a history teacher for 18 years. And then I moved from history teaching to become more involved in supporting schools in their looking at disadvantaged children, how to support those children. And eventually I was seconded to an organisation called Boing Boing, which is much more embarrassing to say than I'm a teacher, but it's actually literally linked to the idea of resilience. And through Boing Boing, which is a community interest company, we look at evidence. It's all evidence-based, the evidence around supporting resilience in lots of different environments, but obviously my area is schools. We take that evidence and we try and make it practical for schools and people who work with young people. And then, of course, the most important thing is we take the view from the schools and people working, actually trying to use this evidence with young people and take it back to the universities so they know what's going on. So recently I've been working with 24 schools in Hastings. I don't know whether any of you know Hastings, there's a picture of it there. And also Blackpool. Blackpool's having a resilience revolution. It's the first town in the world where everybody is talking about resilience and well-being and really trying to focus on the resilience framework, which I'll be talking to. But I've also worked with a couple of schools in Caerphilly, which were amazing. I don't know that any of you have come across Bedworth Infant School, but look it up and see if you can speak to the head teacher there. He's absolutely fantastic. So that's me and my experience. I thought it's quite important really for us to get a chance to check in. Some of you may use these sort of things with your students, but actually we probably need to do it for ourselves. If you're anything like me, having loads and loads of thoughts and feelings and issues sort of whirling around, and it's quite difficult sometimes to check in with exactly how I'm feeling. So we need to sort of acknowledge the situation we're in at the moment, which is during a global pandemic, also trying to implement new routines, working with families who've experienced a whole range of different things through lockdown and so on, and then teaching itself being a very intense and challenging job to do, obviously incredibly rewarding. So it's very important to check in with where we're at. And I know also in terms of the timing that the curriculum for Wales is also being sort of rallied, and there's need to be thoughts around that. So there's many things going on, and it's very important to think about where you are. And if you're in, I don't know whether you can see those pictures or see what they say, but if you're in one of them, like horrified, or any of the other negative ones, thinking about what you need to do exactly to get to one of the other more positive emojis. So this is what we're going to be doing today and over the next 45 minutes. We need to have a shared understanding of what I'm talking about in terms of reference to the resilience research evidence, and so that we know we're talking about the same thing. I'll be talking a lot about resilience as a means to access well-being. And resilience, of course, is used in many different ways in education, but so I'll sort of elucidate that. Then we need to think about structural issues, because this session, much as it's fantastic that you've turned up to think about your well-being and perhaps well-being of your colleagues and staff, really just helping people individually to become resilient or to look after their well-being is not really enough, because everybody's affected by the structural issues which occur in the whole system around people. So we'll be looking at some of those. We'll be looking at school systems again, and then some practical tips at the end about when you're looking at yourself and taking control over your own sort of outlook in your lives, some things you can do which come from the evidence. So that's what we're planning to do. Okay, so definitions. Well-being, of course, as it says there from the World Health Organization, positive physical, social and mental state. So it's a sort of point in time well-being, and it's a mental state, it's an outlook. And surveys which people have done around well-being tend to be linked to a sense of financial security, a sense of security about the future. So at the moment, of course, it's a very big ask to be thinking about well-being in that sense, because there isn't very much certainty about what's happening in the future, and that becomes very difficult, which is why I'm going to be talking about resilience as our sort of access to achieving well-being. Of course, we do want our staff to be well and to be mentally well and so on, and the things I'm going to be talking about are aimed at promoting that. So let's think about resilience. Resilience, really, I mean, if you look at that tree I've got a picture of, that is a resilient tree. It's not ideal. If I was a tree, I would prefer to have sort of solid ground. But as you see, that tree is doing the things a tree should do. It's reaching up for the sunlight. It's using what's around it to sort of ground itself, and it's ready when the water comes through. You can see the roots hanging down there. It's ready to take the opportunities. And in a way, that might be where we're at the moment with our current situation, which is not ideal for anybody. So the research about resilience, there's a whole history of research which has taken place, looking at people, groups of population in adverse circumstances who nevertheless seem to have positive outcomes. That's where we're looking. So resilience really is about adverse situations. And it's not about being heroic and having these amazing outcomes. It's having better than expected outcomes given where we're at. So what has been found out by the evidence is that resilience is dynamic. And anybody who experienced the COVID coaster, as it's been termed, and certainly I did throughout this whole period that we've been in since March, will understand that resilience is dynamic. So for me, for instance, I may be alone in this, I had these moments of disproportionate anger. Somebody knocked over my tomato plants and I lost it basically. And then unspeakable sadness. And then at other times, I just felt this sense of elation. And, you know, everyone was talking about hearing the birds and just thinking, oh, I just seem to be able to get through this. But on the whole, because my usual ways of sort of connecting with people and the usual things I used, exercise and so on, to help me keep going when things got tough, when they were taken away, it became very difficult. And so understanding that resilience is dynamic helps us to understand why sometimes we can't, you know, we have these lows, we sink down, and that is perfectly normal. It's a very normal reaction to what is going on. But what we need to do is we need to think about, how do we come back from that? How quickly can we come back from that? And also we talk about, in resilience research, they talk about inoculated resilience. So that is having a certain amount of adversity and stressful situations, not toxic stress, which you can, if you can make meaning out of that, and if you can learn from that, that gives you the confidence when things get difficult again and help you to adapt. So actually bouncing forward rather than bouncing back. And the other rather positive thing that comes out of the resilience research, as you see from Anne Maston there, is that it's ordinary magic. So where people and communities have recovered in the most difficult circumstances, in long-term disadvantage or conflict situations, where they have recovered, it's very, very ordinary things that need to be done. It literally is the things that you know about getting enough sleep, about getting some exercise, about connecting with people, about having a laugh, all those things that you know, but the evidence tells us it works. And also sometimes they don't occur naturally for us. And sometimes we actually need to plan for them. And through attending this workshop, I'm giving you permission to plan for some of these things, because it will help you to be resilient and support your well-being. Do feel free to comment. I'm not going to look at the comments at the moment, but definitely all of this is about the co-creation of knowledge. So if you have things to say to each other, do please carry on and chat in the chat room. So now let's have a look at these structural ideas I was thinking about. If you look at that koala, that might be how you feel, and it's also sometimes how, when we're trying to support some of the pupils and families, that's how they're feeling. So in Boing Boing, we talk about beating the odds, so where the adversity is against us, how we beat that in the moment, but also changing the odds. It would be wrong of me, I think, to say, well, you know, as with that koala, I could spend this whole session teaching you mindfulness, for instance. There's a lot of evidence to say that mindfulness is very helpful for well-being. But I teach you the mindfulness, and then you go back into the same environment we're all living, and you're supposed to be coping with that. But actually, really, a lot of the issues which face teachers and staff in schools are structural. So that's scary, but it's true. You know, who's chopping down the trees that koala is, is suffering as a result of? So what are we going to do about that? Well, I put it to you that we can do things. As a history teacher of 18 years, luckily, I know that when people realize their power, things can change. And those little contributions that you make at the same time as in the moment looking after your well-being, but those contributions you make towards an education that you value, towards a sort of societal outlook that you think will make things better. If you can make those little contributions, those tiny little contributions, then that's the thing that's going to change. And we need to change that. We can't just go around adding more adversity and then trying to be resilient. So what might that consist of? Well, it could consist of joining campaigns. There are lots of campaigns going on when you've got the energy for that. It might be signing petitions. It might be when there are surveys, and I know that the Welsh Government is going to do a survey, I think, of teaching staff to actually contribute your ideas, trying to make sure that where people are asking, what is it actually like to be in a school in Wales, that you are telling them. So taking those moments. So it could be big things like that to help make these structural changes. But also it can be much smaller things. It can be things where, in terms of your relationship with other people and what you challenge in your day-to-day. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So this can be a very helpful thing. You may have done this with your own students, but if you have that sense, I don't know whether you ever have that, where you just have this concern, you know, and then we talk about worry being inefficient problem solving, which it is really, where if you wake up like me in the middle of the night and just think, worry, I'm not really sure what, you know, I've mixed up the buying of the stamp is just as important as climate change and so on. I can't unpick it. This can be a really, really useful exercise. So obviously there's things, if you differentiate what you're concerned about in terms of your life mixed in with your school life, what you're going to put in that center there are some things you can have control over. You can do it in terms of your planning, in terms of what you decide not to do, what you decide you are going to do, what you're going to prioritize and so on. But actually in that second thing, the things that you can influence are greater than you think. And again, quite often you don't see it, but you know, if you've been in teaching for long enough, you know that you can say one thing to one pupil or something to their parents or something to your colleague, and that grows and that has a positive chain reaction. And the more that you take those opportunities, the more difference it's going to make, but you need to believe it. So for instance, in that we could have, I was talking about how to make these structural changes, thinking about the language that you use. I'm sure many of you would share with me the idea of never using the word chav. If you think about the word chav, it's used quite a lot over in England, and it's never used in a positive way. It's invariably used to describe people who are working class, and it's a sort of way of denigrating people's choices and culture and so on. It's negative. And so thinking about the language that you use is very, very important in terms of what you contribute, which then comes around again. And then also thinking about changing the story within your school, where the story about a certain area which feeds the school. In where I live in Brighton, there's an area called Molescombe, and people make jokes all the time about, oh, don't get lost there, or you'll get your car nicked, or, you know, all sorts of things, these sort of flippant comments, but also just assuming certain groups of people are going to do badly. Challenging that, changing the story about that. These are the things that we don't see, but you're putting that out there, and those are the things which are going to contribute to well-being in the end, because that affects the type of people, the experience of the people we're trying to teach and their families, and then has this positive chain reaction effect. So although that seems sort of wide angle on how to improve well-being, really we can't ignore the role that we can play in that, and resilience is everybody's business. But let's move on to schools. So there's been thousands of studies into resilience, and they can, and these sort of, the information that comes out of them can easily, or we have at Boing, we've sort of divided them into these 5 sections, which when you look at them are similar, they look similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy. So you have the basics, belonging, learning, coping, and core self, and having opportunities around around these are known to promote resilience. It's not like Maslow's hierarchy of needs in that there's no evidence to suggest you need to do one before you can get to the other, and so on, until you get your self-actualization. So you can start anywhere. And in fact, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that a sense of belonging seems to carry people through enormous hardship. In my work, we look at these things and we look at school systems, because again, we're not really about trying to make you individually responsible for your own well-being. Inevitably, your well-being is going to be affected by the processes and systems that are going on in your school. And sometimes it means that the school and the school leaders need to really think about, well, how are we going to promote opportunities? How are we going to promote opportunities for belonging? How are we going to make learning an everyday part of the school experience, you know, in a positive way, not in an overwhelming way, and so on. So it's about planning, but it's also about you within that school, if you're not the senior leader, to be sharing some of your ideas. You know, this is what it's like to be me. This is what I think we should do. And for also the schools I work in, which do the best, are the ones which really do listen. It's not about lip service and like, oh, fill in this survey, thanks very much, you know, move on, tick. It's really about trying to find out, what is it like to be different members of staff in this school, and what ideas do they have? You may well have been in other wellbeing sessions at your school where somebody's come up with an idea that, I know what we should do. We need to have a staff night out. And at my school, in fact, they suggested it's like, when you've done all your work, when you've done all your target setting and your marking and so on, let's have a family picnic on a Saturday. And that was the last thing that anybody wanted to do, was to think about school on a Saturday. So that was a situation where it really wasn't involving the staff in making these decisions. But schools do need to think about their systems, and they need to plan for them. So finding out whether everybody's got the equipment for the job, you know, thinking about, can we promote ways for staff to get fresh air and exercise? Can we have walking meetings? Is that possible in the COVID situation? There was a school I knew where they would provide fresh fruit in the staff room, another school where they did fresh fruit when they did parents' evenings. This was in the old days when we did face-to-face parents' evenings. That was sponsored by a local greengrocers. And then another place it was sponsored by Tesco's. So really promoting the idea of the healthy lifestyle and promoting the idea of sleep. In some places they say, don't send emails at the weekend. But again, you need to discuss this with your staff. For some staff, they need to get their emails out of the way because that's the only time they can do it. These discussions are really about how you decide for your own school. Sense of belonging. Some schools have buddy systems. When you have staff who are having to stay at home and self-isolate for various reasons, really having systems around who's checking in with them, making sure their sense of belonging is still there despite the fact they can't literally be in school. And celebrating not just attainment and progress, but celebrating acts of caring. We put in the idea of belonging, we put in the idea also of being able to take responsibility. So when you can do things for other people, then that could be helpful to a whole staff sense of well-being, that they have opportunities. So it might be that you have the food bank in your school and the staff can just contribute to the food bank as they come in, those type of things. So just providing ways that the staff are happy with to contribute as well. Learning, I talked about, and learning, thinking about what type of learning are we promoting? There was a school that I worked with where on their inset day, they had somebody come in and teach some DIY skills, I think plastering and stuff, you know, something which is really useful. Incredibly, I'd love to know how to do that. Or even some other sort of baking or crocheting skills. And you need to be careful how you negotiate this, because some people come on the inset day and they think, I've got so much work to do and now I'm doing a knitting class with everybody. So really, people need to understand always in schools why things are being done. It's not just an idea from on high, oh, I've just thought of this, let's do this, but consult with your staff to see, does this work for you? But really promoting learning, that is a very strong way of encouraging resilience. Coping, of course, is what many people think about when they're thinking about being resilient. These can be systems like, particularly at the moment, I think, emails with parents. What is your school doing around communicating with parents? Do they have a system? So we have, on the one hand, we have very worried, anxious parents who want to know what's going on, and perhaps the current communication system isn't working for them, so they're building up. On the other hand, the parents perhaps are seeking to have this connection with staff the whole time, which is just blowing your mind, because there's this expectation that you've got to reply and so on. So really thinking through the systems about that. I know some schools in Hastings, they've just directed parents that if you've got any emails about COVID specific things, this is the email I'd like you to use, and they have a rota of people to answer it. So you don't have everybody constantly with this blanket emails. So thinking about things like that, modeling, everybody modeling, leaning on others, asking for help and so on. Schools finding ways to celebrate those small victories. Really, that's where, getting the hope from there. And some schools, for instance, do allow time for problem solving. You've got a particular issue, a particular pupil or a particular family, and actually a few staff are given time to get together to try and chew through and work out what the solutions are to that. So this is where the school needs to commit to these processes which are going to enable well-being to come as a byproduct of that. And of course, core self is about autonomy. Now, certainly in England, autonomy has been, over the past 10 years or so, has really been taken back from the teaching profession. And this idea of trying to trust teachers as professionals, really needs to be built up again. That's where you get your creativity. That's where you're going to get your creativity when you're contributing to the new Welsh curriculum. So everybody within a school feeling that they matter. And as I said before, resilience is everybody's business. So all of these things I'm talking about within the school, the systems, can also be contributed to by everybody. And that means, when after the summer you see your cleaner and you say, thank you so much. Oh, you did such a wonderful job in my classroom. Those little things which you can so easily forget to do. Or when you hear somebody say something really good in your class about another teacher, you remember to tell them. Or you say to the receptionist, you are so fantastic. I love the way you dealt with that issue with that particular parent. That was great. Those little things, we're all contributing. That's where you get a resilient culture in a school. So some of you may have some ideas, and I'd love it if you were sharing some examples of some of the things that you do within your school. Really, this is the space where you can share some of the things, and you may want to share them under these headings, if you like. What have you done which has been really helpful to create a sense of belonging in your school? There was one school I had where they, at the beginning of the year, they had they sort of sorted out car shares with all the new staff, because it's actually very important when you're a newly qualified member of staff to drive in and go home with somebody and sort of offload some of the stuff can be really helpful. But you don't really know who to ask, you don't know who lives near you and so on. So sorting those things out can be really helpful. Now, what I have here is the resilience framework. So this is a sort of toolkit. It's on an A4. It's free to download on our website. And it's a way of thinking about the system of the school. You can use it to work with pupils to think about their own resilience as well. But really, this is a systems approach, as I say. It's about saturating your school environment with opportunities for all of these and really trying to keep a sense of hope there going. So that's how you would use the resilience framework. And you'll see underneath there are the noble truths. So these are what we feel underpins resilience. And if you were thinking about planning, I want to make some changes to the school and really think about how we can implement resilience, a good place to start is with the noble truths. So as you see there, it starts with accepting. And that is something I think we probably need to be doing at the moment, which is really not liking this situation. This feels awful. But sometimes you just have to accept where we're at, where our families are at, how much learning they've missed. Accept that for the moment so that we can then start building. But accepting is also sometimes about accepting things about yourselves. Now, you may not be like me, but I'm going to fess up here in front of you all that there were certain pupils who really pressed my buttons. They had far more effect on me than other students would. And it tended, for me, it tended to be sort of pouty girls who didn't seem to care about anything. And probably because I had trouble with those sort of girls when I was at school myself. But I would just really find it difficult. And so accepting is also accepting that that might be a normal part of being a member of staff. We need to treat pupils with unconditional positive regard. So in order to do something with that, it might be about me going to find a buddy who I feel safe with and say, oh God, I feel like this whenever she does that. And then accept that and say that you can go back. So accepting is about a lot of things. Conserving, you'll see, is the second one. And conserving is about conserving the good. Resilience framework is very much an asset-based approach. So looking at what you have already in your life, what your school is already doing, which is helpful, and finding all those things out. So then you can have the energy potentially to work on some of the other aspects which might need to be tweaked in order to build your resilience and build the resilience of pupils. So conserving that, but also conserving your boundaries, knowing when to stop. There's so much that needs to be done. You know, work expands to fill the time available. So really thinking about where your boundaries are for yourself and for your family. Commitments, the third one, very important not to start things if you can't commit to them. So for yourself, you know, I tried to do this couch to 5K thing. I only did it once, but I hadn't thought about when I was going to do it, really. I really wasn't that committed. I didn't have the right shoes. It was totally a spur of the moment thing. But it's really thinking about, can you commit to things? And there's lots of evidence to say when schools start these initiatives and they haven't really consulted properly on it, they haven't brought the staff on board, there is nothing worse for staff morale than to be doing something you can't see the point of. So really think about things and think about the long term when you're introducing new things to do. And the last one is enlisting. We really need within schools this idea of enlisting the help that we need, seeing what's out there, thinking laterally and imaginatively and creatively, what's in our communities, who's there to help us, and use that help. And don't be afraid to use it, because we're all learning the whole time. So that's the Resilient Framework, and do feel free to look that up on www.boingboing.org.uk. So I'm now going to be talking about some things literally about you, yourselves. This is your time. And you'll see there, hopefully, I don't know whether you can read it. I don't know whether I want you to be able to read it, but that's fine. I did stick it up there. So that's a picture of a little notebook that I started during full-on lockdown in England, where I was completely at sea. I just didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't know how to structure my day or respond. Everything was new. I had children at home and so on. I couldn't have contact in the same way. And my friends told me about this 5 ways to well-being, which is very similar to some of the resilience ideas, but it's personal rather than systemic. And you'll see some of the things I had in there possibly, but I'm going to talk you through it anyway. So I wrote it down at the beginning of the day, and that may or may not work for you, but sometimes if you're feeling all at sea, this is a really important thing to do. So write down every day something active you're going to do, or choose to do something active. And that could be your walk, that could be the gardening. You know, we hear about this all the time, how important activity is, but commit to that. Commit to doing something, even if you have to set your alarm on your phone to make yourself do it, you know, and really believe that's going to help your creativity as well. So that can be any form of activity. And then another thing is to commit to making some form of connection during the day. I would, for instance, choose 2 people who I was going to phone or contact via WhatsApp, or just have some sort of connection, because just knowing that connecting with people in some way really makes a difference. This could be family members, it could be friends, it could be anybody, but 2 people a day I would choose to. I know that in situations in schools at the moment, that sense of connection is very, very hard, particularly if you're just staying in your bubbles. And I'm sure your sort of break times and your normal means for connecting with other staff is severely circumvented. And so in the spirit of accepting that's the situation at the moment, then we move on to try and think, okay, what can we do about it? We know that connection and belonging is really important. So what can we do to try and recreate that sense of belonging? Learning, as I said, is very, very important. And then think of learning for yourself. So again, at the beginning of the day, I'd choose something that I was going to try and learn. So for me, I'm really lucky that I've got a garden, and I had an app on my phone where I could identify flowers. So I just put it there. Because I've lived in, this first time I've ever had a house with a garden. So flowers are a totally new idea for me. I didn't know what any of them were, so I would identify one at a time. It was great, but it could be anything. It can be looking up on YouTube how to rewire your cooker. No, that's probably a very bad idea, but something like that. Just sort of thinking about planning to learn something. And then another very important thing, and I talked about this a little bit before when I was talking about belonging, is this idea of giving. Now, gratitude and giving are known to be really, really helpful to people's mental health. And finding ways to do that. It doesn't have to be giving money. It can be giving money. It might be just thinking of a colleague who you're not necessarily friends with, but you know might be having a hard time, and just sending them a little message, just saying, oh, thinking of you, just checking in. It might be anything. It might be, you know, as we did during the lockdown, getting stuff for the neighbours. It could be a whole range of things, but just sort of planning to do something, knowing that it's actually helpful to you to be giving in some way to other people. And finally, noticing. And if many teachers find this quite difficult, because teaching is such a reactive profession, 1,000 different decisions a day, and really very little time to notice, which is why you need to plan it in. So really think about, I am going to, at this time, I'm going to sit and notice, or I'm going to go and look at that. I don't even remember what the view is out that window, or something like that. I'm going to notice what the stars are doing tonight. Is Mars here? I don't know. Anything like that. But again, it's this idea of planning for it. And whilst sometimes it's really hard when you're a member of school staff to have yet another routine, oh my gosh, you know, we're sort of dominated by routines when we're at school. I'm not going to do another timetable for my spare time. Just think about how this works for you. But this is evidence-based. Doing these things are the type of things that are going to give you the energy, therefore, to then perhaps go and tackle some of the bigger things, which we know we need to do in order to support well-being generally and create a resilient school climate. So this is just a little exercise as well, which you can possibly do if you're interested in it. You may have done it with your students, but again, all the things that work for the students are quite useful for us ourselves as well. So if you have these ideas where you've got lots of things swirling around, like, you know, you might be worrying about climate change or unemployment or some, you know, really huge things, again, you can divide them up and just separate them off into your big worries. It might be that there's a pupil who you're particularly worried about, or a family, or, you know, it feels very big, and separating that off from the medium worries, which might be, I've got to plan that lesson, I've got to learn how to do this remotely. That might not be medium for you, that might be big. This is all very personal, of course. How am I going to get the MOT sorted out? Oh, I've got to pay my speeding fine. That's just me. And, you know, oh, what am I going to cook for dinner? That for me is a medium worry, not a small worry, by the way. And is my son smoking weed? I need to check. He said it was just coming in through the window, you know, so these can come in somewhere. And then you can have your smaller worries, which might literally be, oh, I've got to get a stamp for that card, I'm going to miss somebody's birthday. It might be, God, I think I might have offended so-and-so. And so all these things, it's really, really helpful, it's known to be helpful to separate out your worries, so then you can sort of, they're much easier to deal with, and then going back to that idea, the things you can and can't control. So that's just a little technique which works very well in terms of how we support our well-being. So I've rattled through a lot of different things there. The last thing I want to think about is motivation and purpose. So in a situation where there's loads and loads of changes going on in school, it's also a great opportunity in our education system, you know, throwing things up in there and noticing where disadvantage is really hitting, and noticing what happens when you take away exams, and noticing how people say, oh, that year was wasted because we didn't take those exams, and lots of things which they're saying about education, and you think, hang on a minute, is that what education's about? So this is a great opportunity, but it's also a great opportunity for you to rethink why you're here. And that the quickest way to burn out is to lose all sense of why you're even doing this in the first place. And then things are just piled onto you and you just feel more and more resentful. So here are 3 questions you could ask yourself about yourself and your relation to work, which could be very interesting to answer. And schools can do this, or you can do this for yourself. But think about it. What is unique about you? So what strengths do you have that have really led to your happiest times at work? What is that? What has brought you here to this place in a school to be educating? What is it that you're giving? And, holding on to that. And then another thing, a way to thinking about a time, might be quite recently, might be a long time ago, where you were acting in a way where everything seemed to come together. All your skills came together, and that was right. That was going well. You knew in the time that was fantastic. It might have been a lesson. It might have been how you were working with other members of staff, how you were working with parents. But that was it. Really, again, thinking about that carefully, taking time to reflect and notice that, and that helps you to create your sense of purpose. A sense of purpose cannot be given to you. You can't have people in your school saying your sense of purpose is this. We all have our unique sense of purpose, but sometimes we don't have time to reflect on what that is. And then perhaps another way to look at it is to just think about, we are in a context of adversity. We're in a context of extreme adversity, and lots of the things that we relied on and understood have been totally thrown up. And we're being asked to do things, clean toilets and clean desks and bubbles on top of all the other things that we had to do. So what do you believe can be done? What do you want to do and achieve in the context of this adversity? And I'm just going to sort of leave that there for a minute. What do you really believe? You've got to believe in something. This teaching is not the sort of job where you can just sort of wander into it and sort of do the day-to-day. So I'm not very good at leaving silence for you to think about that, actually. So I want to leave some time for some questions. So I shall, and it's just very strange talking to a camera and not knowing whether you're even thinking about this or not. So I'm going to leave that there out as a question, and perhaps we could have some discussion. You might be having some discussion about that in the chat. So just some quick survival tips then. In terms of your mental health and well-being, taking time to reflect on positives, and as I said, remembering to give positive feedback to other people, all these things come around. It's a really good survival tip. Don't judge yourself by things you're not in control of. In other words, it can be very tempting to think, I'm only a success if somebody gives me feedback, if the pupils like my lessons, if the parents mention it, if my line manager notices how good I am. But actually, you can be the best judge of whether you're being successful in things. So don't hand that power to other people. Just a very practical one in terms of you do need to be very creative. So, and I know that teachers get a lot more emails nowadays, but do your creative tasks before ever looking at your emails, because it's absolute killer. It can be very tempting to think, oh, I'll just get my emails out of the way, and then that absolutely extinguishes your creative power. Really, really be disciplined about taking breaks, real breaks. I know it's very hard with the whole bubble situation, but breaks where you're not talking about work, where you're not talking about COVID, where you're finding other things to talk about, and find those opportunities to walk. Really be creative about how you can get some exercise as part of your daily life. And I'm, as I said before, I'm giving you permission. You deserve to laugh. I was at a school where at the end of every term, the staff used to make a video, and we were supposed to be moderating, I think, coursework, but actually it was considered far more important for all the different departments. It was a secondary school, to get together, dress up in stupid wigs, and do some sort of leavers video. And that was the highlight of the year, and that really brought us together. And that was very, very important and powerful at the end of a very difficult school year. So doing those things, creating those opportunities to have a laugh, getting your sleep routines right, and giving yourself sleep is the most important thing. We're always telling that to the students, but do it for yourself. Healthy diet, if it means freezing food at the beginning of the week, which is healthy so that you can have it during the week, do that, but really think about how you're going to get that. And then the last thing I'd say on that, which is an unusual one, but really embrace those positive relationships with parents. Quite often we talk about parents who are hard to reach and difficulties and so on, but there are parents who are really helpful, who we need to focus on as well, who really are engaged, who understand that you're a human being, and having those really positive relationships with them, as well as working with all parents and helping all parents to feel that way, to feel part of the school. That's, remember that positive relationship that you can have. So that's the end of my very, very quick expose of what we've learned from research about resilience and well-being. As I say, you can use that resilience framework. You can use it to audit how your school is doing, to see all the positives that are going on, for planning other things. You can use it with pupils if you choose to. And then we have a whole range of resources about teaching about resilience to pupils, and also we have more things about what we call practitioner resilience, or resilience and well-being of staff. So that's just a sort of little gateway into some of the information we picked up through resilience research. So I'm going to stop sharing now and then see whether we've got any questions that have come up.
Thank you so much for that, Gabrielle. It was really, really interesting, and lots of really practical, applied pieces of advice there that I hope people have found useful. While you were talking, there was quite a good discussion amongst participants about various different activities that take place within their schools. So we've had several examples. One was, one school has an annual Wellbeing Day where everyone goes and has a picnic, regular celebration of the values of the school, so respect, well-being and independence. During lockdown, one school had staff bingo. One technique that's used in the school is encouraging people not to message teachers late in the evening or the weekend unless it's an absolute emergency. Another great example was that music lessons were offered during lunchtime in one particular school. So that goes to your point of, the importance of learning something for yourself, and staff choirs, various things like that. So there's been some really great discussion around that, Gabrielle. Question from Raymond. This is about sense of purpose. And does your sense of purpose have to come from work? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, no, but in terms of your own well-being, but I suppose I was thinking of it in terms of work, because it comes from research, which is about how to maintain your sort of sense of well-being in work when things get difficult and when there's not very much time to think. And so it doesn't have, for yourself as a person, it doesn't have to, but I think particularly in a job like teaching, which is incredibly demanding, and sometimes, if you don't see the fruits of your labor, or you don't necessarily get all the positive stuff back immediately that you'd like to, you need to hold on to what it is, what your sense of purpose is, and also what your principles are, because lots of people have lots of opinions about education, lots of politicians do, and really, you're the experts. So just knowing what you think and knowing what you're trying to do can help you sort of cut through all the difficulties that which are sort of thrown at you.
Yeah, and I suppose related to that, Catherine says that she went into teaching to teach and make a difference. Supervising hand washing and supervising toilet trips is taking away from teaching time. And then also to that, Catherine, it's relevant, says keeping pupils safe and healthy is also making a difference. So I suppose these are, things that are particularly pertinent at the moment during these challenging times. And I think, please do comment, Gabrielle, it's that thing of sort of holding in your head what your sense of purpose is, despite these perhaps unwanted additional distractions.
Yes, I mean, I suppose there's two things there. There is an element of accept, we're in this situation where lots of people are having to do things that we wouldn't normally consider to be part of teaching. But also, when I was talking about the structural stuff, there's also an element to which we also perhaps need to be adding our voice to. Why is it that teachers are having to do this? Where's the funding for trying to make sure that there's other ways of doing this, and keeping that conversation going, keeping the highlight on that. So I think in a double way, yes, keeping people safe, and we're all trying to cope with a difficult situation, but nevertheless keeping that focus. Don't just accept so that we don't make the changes that need to be made. So I think what I didn't mention when I was talking about structural change, it might be that you need to work with and through your unions and so on. Unions can be a voice, but unions are only as powerful as the people within the unions. So taking some opportunity to, again, just feed your opinions in and make sure that everybody knows what's going on, because some of the people who are making decisions about education really haven't got a clue what it's actually like. And so we need to be telling them.
Absolutely. Are there any more questions for Gabrielle? I suppose one of the things that I was quite interested in, Gabrielle, that you may have a view on, and perhaps this is something that people have encountered, it's this idea of resilience, which is so important, and we do talk about it a lot. But I think sometimes a sort of negative side of that is that people think, oh, just be more resilient, just, you know, get on with it. And it's that challenge, isn't it, of developing resilience in a positive way, without it just being some sort of box ticking exercise whereby someone might think if only people were more resilient, all of the problems in the world would disappear. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, exactly. And thanks for raising that. I mean, we really, the evidence says that resilience is not a character trait at all. Resilience is about somebody's interaction with their environment. So if you don't have the resources in your environment, it's really, really difficult to behave resiliently. And by the same token, you have people, I'm sure you've experienced a pupil who may come into your school who has got up, there's nobody to help them get up, there's nobody to help them organize themselves. They somehow manage to get into school. And then one of your colleagues will say, your tie's not straight, or where's your pen? And actually, or else somebody says, you know, your mother or something to them, and they lose it. And people say, well, they're not very resilient. They can't put up with things when somebody swears at them. Whereas in fact, they've been so resilient to get there. So we really need to have a sort of complex understanding of what behaving resiliently is. It's not it's not just gripping our or putting our heads in the sand, or just holding on, gritting our teeth. You know, it's about responding to what's happening. But in order to do that, we need the resources around us. And as I said before, sometimes you can't, it would be very normal to be knocked back by things. It's very normal for us to be knocked back by what's going on at the moment. But it's not about, oh, well, you've just got to be more resilient. It's like, okay, well, help me to be more resilient by putting the resources there, which I need, and giving me the time to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think sort of getting an understanding of that complexity is really important, isn't it? If there are no further questions, I just want to highlight to you that I've just posted a link in the chat to a very short survey that you can complete. We'd love to get some feedback on the session, and perhaps you've attended other sessions earlier today as well. You can just use the one survey. There's also a couple of questions in there about the support that's available to you. That's really valuable to us as we continue to deliver our wellbeing programme in Wales. We will analyse that and look at what you're feeding back to us. So I really would encourage you to do that if you can spare a couple of minutes, please. And I guess all that remains for me to say is a very, very big thank you to Gabrielle. Lots of thank yous coming through on the chat as well, Gabrielle. I think people are responding very positively.
Great.
And very much the same thing to all of you for attending and for participating. I really hope it's been useful. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day and hope to see you all soon. Thank you.